Hi all, this is Cressida Hall here. I'm the General Manager of AIMA. I'd like to welcome you to tonight's webinar. The topic tonight is turning up the heat on COVID-19. We're thrilled to have Professor Marc Cohen here to present to us, and he's going to be in conversation with AIMA's own wonderful Dr Tim Ewer. So now I'm going to hand over to Tim. Okay, thank you all.
Thank you, Cressida. Wonderful. And just to say, for me, it's a great pleasure to be talking with Marc. Marc is an old-term friend. We've known each other for 25 years. I won't tell you how we met, but it was something to do with him doing fire sticks in the middle of the night at a conference. But since then, we've shared a lot of the journey for AIMA. And Marc is very much a sort of inspirational person in terms of how integrative medicine has gone forward in Australasia, and also in research and looking at innovative ideas all round. And more recently, he's been going into areas such as water and a number of others, which we'll be exploring tonight. So the title tonight is Turning Up the Heat on COVID. And what it'll be about is literally that subject, but also turning up the heat in terms of the bigger picture and ideas that we can look at as we go along to kind of see what really important underlying processes are going on that we may be able to influence, or at least we should know about. So Marc, as a starting point, take us through the idea of lines of defense when it comes to a virus like this. What are they, and what should we do with them?
Well, it's yeah, thanks for the question. It's basically immunology 101. It's what you learn in first year medical school, that your immune system has 3 lines of defense. And the first line is your skin and mucous membranes. The second line is your innate immune system, which is the macrophages and complement and IgA and lysozymes and all those things. And then the third line of defense is making antibodies and memory cells and what we think of as long-term immunity. And I was really frustrated at the start of this whole pandemic, where people weren't really talking about the first and second lines of defense at all. They were going straight to the third. We need a vaccine. We need to build up antibodies. And when you understand what happens normally, that normally we're bathed in a sea of viral particles and genetic information, and that's a good thing. As a child, even your hands are an extension of that, because to make antibodies to, say, respiratory viruses especially, and I must say that respiratory viruses are different from other viruses, double-stranded DNA viruses, because they're more fragile and they've got this lipid envelope. So to actually get them into your body, they have to go through your mucous membranes. They won't transmit through your epithelial surface on your epidermis, on your hands. But what your hands can do is touch something and then touch your nose and touch your mouth and introduce them in a very small dose to your body. And normally there's a whole sort of ecosystem of viruses and bacteria and archaea and fungi that are in your body always as commensals. And they actually help train your immune system. So if there's a new virus, it's a pathogen, the microbiome is actually helping introduce those pathogens to your epithelial cells and your antigen presenting cells, so you can start to make antibodies against it. And the critical thing in your nose is, breathing through your nose is really important. And your nose and your nasal passages are really important as heat exchanger. So in the summer, it helps cool the air, and in the winter, it helps warm the air. And what would happen normally in winter, as the air gets colder, the mucus becomes thicker, and you can actually get cracks in the epithelium. And also when there's less sunlight and there's less fresh food and you're in more cramped conditions, that's when the flu season happens, where the viruses can penetrate a lot easier. But normally there would be 2 layers of mucus. There's an outer sticky layer of mucus and a sort of inner, more watery layer of mucus. And under that watery layer of mucus, or within that watery layer of mucus, are these cilia. And the cilia are the little hairs that come out the top of the epithelium. And they beat at about 12 to 15 times per second, just like sort of wheat in a windy field. And they keep that mucus moving along at about 1 millimeter a minute. So that sort of sticky layer of mucus is on the top. It's trapping pollen, it's trapping bacteria, it's trapping viruses, and moving about 1 millimetre a minute towards the back of your throat, where you normally swallow it, 30 mils a day, just gets swallowed unconsciously, or you cough it up. Now, that's the normal defense. And the things you can do to support that is having a nice, warm, moist environment. When the air's dry and cold, or the mucus starts to get thicker and hard to move and the cilia can't beat, that's when the viruses hang around a lot longer. And the viruses do need to penetrate an epithelial cell. So normally, and the vast majority of people who get exposed to the SARS-CoV-2, the virus that causes COVID-19, by far, 85, 90+% of people, they'll get exposed to the virus. It'll get shown to one of their antigen presenting cells. Their body will process that, make antibodies to it. They may do a little sniff and swallow, and then that's it, and they've got antibodies. And they've never even known they've had the disease. They're asymptomatic.
Right.
So
what about, can I ask, Mark, you talked about the kind of the water, the humidity. What about the heat in the nasal passages, the lungs? How does that play a part?
Well, so the part of the nose and the nasal cavity is to humidify the air. Now, if the air is really cold and dry, they can dry out and the epithelium can be cracked and you can get a blood nose, and it makes it more prone to viral infection. So keeping the air warm and moist in your home or in your office or wherever you are is a really valuable thing to do. It's a really important thing to do to make sure that that mucus and the cilia can keep on beating and the mucus can keep on moving. And there are natural things we do in wintertime that help that. I mean, one thing is in wintertime, that's when you have, you're more likely to have soups and stews that sit on the stove for a long time and boil away. Well, that's going to increase the humidity of your house. That helps raise the humidity. Having cups of tea all the time, and just by drinking tea, you bring it to your face, and that steam naturally just goes up into your nose. So, and there are many things you can do into your house. I'll grab my tea there. There are many things you can do just in your home. I mean, having plants in your home acts like a buffer for humidity, and the soil that's in the plants acts like a buffer for humidity. And things you can do, washing your clothes, but then drying your clothes near a heater inside in winter. That normally happens. I mean, leaving a bowl of water out by your heater vents, or leaving water out by a window where the sun can hit it, can help raise the humidity in your home. So all of these little things actually help build up, that's line 0 of defense before it even gets to your nose. So that's.
I'm sorry, I was going to say, one of the kind of fears some people have is the possibility of humidity breeding bugs that you don't want, like fungi and so on. And so how do you get that balance? Well,
that is a balance. And ideally you want about 50% humidity, plus or minus 10. So up to 60 and down to 40 is like the sweet spot. If you get to too low, below 40%, and it's hard, sometimes it's hard in winter to have 40% humidity because cold air doesn't hold moisture as well. So one of the things you can do to raise the humidity is actually keep your environment warm. But when the air is really cold, it's hard to keep it humid. But once it's over about 65, 70%, then you get condensation. And water doesn't want to be, water is just it's the medium for life, and it doesn't want to be sterile. So once you've got water condensing, if you've got standing water in your home for more than 24 to 48 hours, mold spores will germinate and they'll start to decompose the building materials. And then when you get mold, and that's a whole nother topic, you get this ecosystem where the mold will start to decompose building materials, and that creates food for bacteria. And then the mold and the bacteria have this sort of bioterrorism war where they're trying to fight for territory, and they release, the mold will release penicillin and antibiotics to get rid of the bacteria, and the bacteria release stuff for them, to conquer the mold. And we get caught in the crossfire of their biotoxin war, and that's what happens when you get toxic mold. It's not just the mold, it's the whole ecosystem that generates with the bacteria and the mold. So yeah, you don't want to have it too moist and too humid. But like if you've got a child with bronchiolitis or something, the first thing you say to the mother, go into the bathroom and turn the shower on and get the air humid. Mind you, if you do that and you get it really humid, and then you're starting getting condensation on the ceiling and the walls, that's a problem. So you do need to have good ventilation. So water is so vital on every aspect of our health and our life, but the water that's in our air is really important for our respiratory health and maintaining that first line of defense, which is that nasociliary clearance and the nasal mucosa. Then if you want to really play with, and you talked about the effect of heat, you can raise that heat. And in Australia, you know, probably New Zealand as well, you know, there's the classic remedy where you get the bowl of boiling water and you put some eucalyptus drops and some tea tree oil in it, get a towel over your head and you just breathe in the steam. And the essential oils actually also help. You know, they have antiviral properties, anxiolytic properties, mucolytic properties. They help break up the mucus. They help, you know, actually have antiviral effects. So just increasing the steam and the temperature of your nasal cavity can help a lot. And then I've done a lot of work recently with the sauna industry. And once you get into a sauna,
take us into the heat now, Mark, because
yeah,
I think you started warm. Let's get hot.
Let's get hot. So what we know about the SARS-CoV-2, you know, respiratory viruses, coronaviruses, they have a lipid envelope, and just like coconut oil will go solid in room temperature, and then it hits a high point and then just melts. The melting point is about 55 degrees. And 55 degrees is, I mean, it's hot for temperature, but in the sauna, I mean, I've been into saunas that are 110 or 120 degrees centigrade. I mean, they're really hot, but the average sauna is about 70 or 80 degrees centigrade. So there's no respiratory virus can actually survive in a hot sauna. But what happens is, you know, I mentioned that your nasal cavity is a really important place for heat exchange. So when you're in this hot environment and you're breathing air at 70 degrees or 70 plus degrees, you're raising the temperature of what would otherwise be the coldest part of your body. Because normally in winter and flu season, your nose is actually the coldest part of your body because it's exchanging heat and warming up the cold air. So suddenly the coldest part of your body becomes the hottest part of your body, and you can easily get the air inside your nose up above 55, you know, 60, 70 degrees is, you know, really achievable. So any viral particles that are in your nose and that's where the virus will stay for the first 2 or 3 days when you're infected, will actually just melt. So the heat actually has a direct antiviral effect, but then the heat also has amazing immune boosting effects. And when I've just written a scientific article on, you know, turning up the heat on COVID-19, and when I was researching that, I was, you know, amazed to discover that not only do insects and fish and birds and reptiles and mammals all raise their temperature when they have pathogens, but plants can actually raise their temperature when they've got an infection. So for the last 1.5 billion years of evolution, raising temperature is an evolutionary response to viral and bacterial pathogens. And fever, as a mammal, you know, we can raise our temperature using fever. And what happens with this heat stress is that directly activates your innate immune system. So it makes the membranes on the macrophages more fluid, so the antigens can be presented better, they can migrate better. It actually activates them. We know, heat is part of the inflammatory response. So you get, infiltration of all the inflammatory cells, and then, lysozyme and complement and IgA and all these innate immune defenses get activated just by this form of heat stress. There's also heat shock proteins, which funnily enough get released not just by heat, but also by cold. So severe cold or severe heat will release heat shock proteins. And what they do is they protect your cells and your proteins within your cells from thermal damage and thermal stress. And if you think about a virus, they don't have repair mechanisms. They're very, very simple. So the evolution of life, as you get more and more evolved, you build up these incredible thermoregulatory defenses to manage your body temperature. And your cellular temperature. And us humans, now we have central heating and cars and airplanes that we can go anywhere in the world and maintain our temperature quite evenly. And our cells also have an amazing amount of repair mechanisms and thermoregulatory mechanisms, so we can tolerate temperatures way above the temperature that a respiratory virus can tolerate.
So Mark, I was going to say, look, the mechanism sounds, very reasonable, what you're telling us. Is there actual studies, proof that we can actually, once we have a virus, particularly something like COVID or coronavirus or some flu virus, is sauna or similar heating going to make a difference to outcome?
Absolutely. And we have studies, not just from evolution, there's historical evidence, there's epidemiological evidence. Jari Laakkonen and his group in Finland have done studies where they followed over 2,000 men for 20 years. And they actually showed that the men who had regular saunas had less respiratory infections, less pneumonia, but also less death from all causes. they had less cardiovascular death, they had less Alzheimer's disease, they had less all-cause mortality for regular sauning. Then there's actually randomized controlled trial evidence where they've done randomized controlled trials to show that regular saunas reduce the incidence of respiratory viral infections and flu. And they've actually done studies both in animals and in humans, where if you've got a respiratory infection, having heat stress actually reduces the severity of the symptoms and the length of the infection and helps with recovery. So on every level, both for prevention and treatment, we have quite good evidence, not specifically on SARS-CoV-2 or on COVID-19, but on respiratory viral infections to show that they can not only prevent, they can actually reduce symptoms and reduce the course of disease.
There's a question come up, which I'll throw in now. You've been talking really about breathing through the nose. What about breathing through the mouth? Does that change things that much?
It changes things, and it's not ideal because your nose is designed, it's got the hairs in your nose which capture pollen and capture antigens, it's got the antigen presenting cells, and you've got a much bigger surface area of the mucosa of your nasal cavity that can be used to detect new pathogens and then build up antibodies to them. So, and the one thing about breathing through your nose is it's harder to get the volume of air. So when you're really running and exercising, that's when you go from nose breathing to mouth breathing, because it's just the volume of air is much greater. And mouth breathing does have other issues with dry throat, because it dries out the back of your throat. And once the back of your throat becomes dry, the epithelium can dry out, it can become cracked, and that allows viral particles to penetrate more easily. So it is much better to nose breathe, if you can.
Another question, this is my question. What about the difference between FIR and Swedish saunas or other saunas? Do you think there's one's better than another, or are they different for different occasions?
I think they're different. I've got both here in my place. But FIR's far infrared sauna. Actually, and in Europe, they won't allow you to call that a sauna. That's not a traditional thing. It's a heat box. It's not a sauna. But what that does, generally that has direct radiant heat of far infrared waves, which are longer wavelengths, so they actually penetrate quite deeply, and means you can tolerate a longer, and you can actually sweat at a lower temperature. So it's more comfortable. And in my opinion, whatever makes you sweat is good. And it's not about how you get there. It's the fact that you're sweating and you're getting heat stress. I mean, exercise will do the same thing. Exercise releases heat shock proteins and raises your body temperature 1 to 1.5 degrees just by, when you go for a run and you're sweating, your body temperature is raised. And that heat stress is beneficial. If you go into an infrared sauna, and often it does depend on how regular you sauna, because it gets to a point where they call you crack. And that's when you actually start to actively sweat. And if you haven't had a sauna for a while, it might take longer to get to the point where you actively sweat. Almost you have to train your body to get used to sweating again. And some people prefer an infrared sauna. Some people prefer traditional Finnish saunas. The traditional Finnish saunas get to much higher temperatures. 70 or 80 degrees would be average, but they go up to 100, even 120 degrees centigrade. You can tolerate in a traditional Finnish sauna. But then they call the loily, the steam that you put on the rocks, and you get the steam coming up. That's part of that experience. But it's not like a steamer, because it actually dries out very quickly because the hot air holds a lot of moisture, and the heat dissipates that. So really, it's a personal preference. Which it's like, what's the best exercise? The one you're going to do. Which is the best sauna? The one that you've got access to, and the one that you like to do to make you sweat. But it's actually getting that heat stress and actively sweating, which is stressful for your body. It's a hormetic stress response, but it's a stress that you're fully in control of, because you get to go out anytime you want and you can cool down. And the other thing that I think isn't stressed enough is also in the research, when they talk about sauna research, they almost, especially when it's done in Finland, they take it for granted that when you have a sauna, then you go out and you jump in the cold and you have a period of hot and cold. And generally, it's just not one session. A normal sauna session would involve maybe 2 or 3 times of going to the heat, cooling down, relaxing, wait till your pulse rate normalizes, and heating up again, cooling down. And I think it's really important to spend just as much time resting and finding your balance point as it is finding those stress points. of hot and cold.
So you kind of brought up the next bit, really. That's heat, or extreme heat in a way. What about extreme cold and oscillating between the two? Is there an advantage in that?
Well, there is, and they're actually synergistic. So I mentioned they both heat and cold will release heat shock proteins. But what happens when you're in the heat, you vasodilate. So your periphery gets very vasodilated, your actually plasma volume increases and your cardiac output increases and your total peripheral resistance decreases. So you get all your skin and your muscles get flushed with blood. And normally that would only happen during exercise while they're making metabolic waste products. So now this is happening without the production of extra metabolic waste products. So your periphery is getting flushed with blood. It's cleaning up those metabolic waste products. Then when you go into the cold, your periphery vasoconstricts, and all that blood then goes into your internal organs and gets flushed through your liver and through your kidneys. So that's actually the time when it's like, it's a workout for your vascular system, but it's also, that's the time when you will actually detoxify. So you're picking up the metabolic waste products while you're in the heat, and then you're pushing them through your organs, and actually you get a diuresis by doing that. And it's really important, while you're doing either heat or cold, to be adequately hydrated with high quality water. And that's a whole nother discussion about water quality, but the highest quality water you can get, it's really important before, during, and after to stay really well hydrated.
There's another question come up here, which I think just carries on, because how does what you're talking about now compare with the Wim Hof technique? Are they much the same?
Well, I mean, there's some similarities. Wim Hof technique is more about playing with carbon dioxide, so hyperventilating, reducing your carbon dioxide, and then breath holding, so you then reduce your oxygen and raise your carbon dioxide. You've done the retreat with me at Maruya where we do, the hot and cold and the breath holding, and Wim Hof, he goes into the cold. He doesn't stress the heat as much, and I actually think it's really good when you're stressing your physiology to go both directions, so hot and cold. If you're going to do a hyperventilation and to equal, balance that with a breath hold. You can do the same with feasting and fasting. I mean, this is like the extreme wellness program that I talk about, where you go to the extremes of water, of glucose, of oxygen, of temperature, and carbon dioxide. And you can manipulate all of those basic elements of life, which, I mean, that's the language of your cells, the language of your mitochondria are in those 5 elements. So you can, you filter and flush your bladder, you feast and fast your bowel, you pant and hold your breath, you do hot and cold with your body, and you do everything and then don't do anything with your brain. So it's really nice to go to the extremes. But both the hot and the cold do what I call, they put you into the state of forced mindfulness. And one of the questions I get a lot is, how do you dose? How long do you stay in the sauna? How long do you stay in the cold? And it's impossible to actually give a prescription. Certainly the heat exposure, cold is just lack of heat, is determined by the temperature, the time, and the humidity, or whether you're immersed in water, because water conducts heat 25 times more than air does. So if you raise the humidity, you actually get much more conduction of transfer of heat. But everyone is different, and even the same person will be different in different times of the day or over multiple days. So what's really important is not the dose that you get, but the feeling that generates. And you want to get to the point where it comfortably hurts. That point of comfortable discomfort, or the point of forced mindfulness. So the point where, okay, this is really hot, and you just have to focus inside and just breathe. You get the same experience when you do yoga, where you'll go to the edge of a yoga stretch, and if you just focus and breathe, you can be comfortably at the edge of that stretch. But if you mind slips, or you try and push yourself, if you try and force it, you'll actually hurt yourself. So both with the sauna and the cold, certainly extreme cold exposure, you don't want to force it, but you want to get to the point where I'm comfortable. If I can just tolerate this, I can just breathe. And even if you do 2 or 3 breaths, where you're just, I think for me, the deeper that you can force to go within, the deeper that experience of really just touching base with your inner being, that the heat and the cold both do that. And if you can just experience that, then you can go out and go to the opposite temperature, and then find a balance point and see if you can then recover that sense of being at one with yourself during neutral temperature and, you know, when you're comfortable. And that I think is where you get the advantage.
And it sounds like, you know, in a way you're saying to some extent there's no gain without some pain, but at the same time, if you make it into a kind of pleasurable, at peace process, that's a positive feedback that you can go to time and time again. And the second bit I was going to bring up is that I guess overall what you're trying to do is improve resilience and hormesis of the system. Do you want to talk to that?
Well, exactly right. So these are all stressful things. And I must say that you need to be cautioned because heat and cold are potentially dangerous. They're potentially harmful. So you don't want to force it or overdo it, and you want to get used to it gradually. And, you know, I've got the cold water hokey pokey, which introduces, you know, cold showers gradually. We can talk about that later. So you don't want to force it, but what you want to do is feel in control, because the rest of the world, you know, the rest of our lives, there's all these stresses that we're not in control of. So here's an opportunity to put yourself under stress that you're fully in control of, and you can get out anytime you want. You can go stay as long as you want, and having that control over that stress, then it makes you both mentally and physically more able to cope with other stresses that are outside your control. And often it's and I think it's really hard to overstate the psychological advantage. And we've talked a lot about the physiological and the cellular mechanisms that happen, but the psychological resilience that you get by putting yourself in a difficult situation and being comfortable in that difficult situation is really powerful. And also certainly during this current pandemic, people feel really out of control. I mean, they're limited in what they can do. And, you know, we're told, you know, just sit at home and wait for, you know, modern medicine and vaccines to save us. But actually having something that's within your control that you're, you know, you have power over is really psychologically stabilizing, and that can help. And I mean, there's also effects on depression and anxiety. And one of the things we did, one of my students who's still finishing her PhD on sauna bathing, Joy Hussain, who's a medical doctor, we did a global sauna survey, interviewing, you know, surveying people all over the world about their sauna experience. And one of the things that came across really strongly was their sleep was improved. And you know, when you have improved sleep, the rest of your life, you know, starts to get better. I'm a big fan of Bill Mollison, you know, the founder of permaculture, and he says, you know, when you get the basic things right, everything else seems to go right by itself. So, you know, if you can get your sleep right and get the water you drink right, you know, everything else can just go well by itself. So the psychological effects, I think, are really powerful and potent. And also you can share it. I mean, how many times can you know, have all this, you know, do something, you know, medically of benefit that's actually fun, but it's social. You know, you can actually enjoy. And you know, in Finland, they talk about the social bonding that happens when you share saunas with each other. So I think it's on so many levels, it's a really great thing to do. And it's, I've been writing documents and trying to petition governments and stuff to say, you know, saunas need to be open. They need to be considered essential services, not opened after cinemas and restaurants and everything else. And they're not places where you actually transmit a virus. I mean, the virus cannot reproduce in water. It can't reproduce outside your body. It needs cells to reproduce. And in a heated environment, it just melts. You know, it's better than soap and water. The heat will just destroy it. So these are actually very safe places, as well as very potent places for building up your own immunity.
Great. Look, one of the simple questions, you've kind of touched on it, but the question is, how frequently should you have a sauna?
As often as you can. The studies that were done by Jari Laakkonen over the 20-year studies was, you know, 3 to 4 times a week was, you know, an optimal. You know, the men who had 3 or 4 times saunas a week did significantly better in terms of their health outcomes than 1 or 2 times a week. So you know, every second day would be good, but it's not available to everybody, you know, all the time. So, but doing it on a regular basis certainly builds up not just your immune system, but your cardiovascular system. And we know that cardiovascular health is cardiovascular disease is one of the biggest killers. And we don't normally have control over our autonomic nervous system. But when you go into a sauna in the cold, it's like doing a bicep curl for the 100,000 kilometers of blood vessels that are all lined by smooth muscle. So you go in the heat, that muscle relaxes. You go into the cold, those muscles contract. And by exercising your vascular system, that improves the nourishment to your whole body and helps prevent stroke and heart disease. And that's actually been documented in terms of the men who, the people who have longer, more frequent saunas have less cardiovascular risk. And we also know that just the effects of the sauna on the cardiovascular system are sort of the equivalent of exercise. And a lot of people who are a bit nervous, I've got high blood pressure, should I go in a sauna? Well, you need to be checked first. But overall, going into a sauna will actually overall reduce your blood pressure because of this effect on the vascular system, improving the vascular smooth muscle health.
Great. Just some time ago, I visited Professor Bill Ray's unit in Texas, and there he uses saunas as a detox for people with serious chemical problems. And he's actually measured the off-gassing of the sauna and found that it's exactly the same chemicals as the person has in their fat when biopsied, and that as they go through the saunaing process, that disappears. So just maybe a comment on its effectiveness for actually detoxing through both sweat and off-gassing.
Now, I haven't seen research by Bill Ray, but Stephen Genuis up in Canada, in Alberta, he's done some research where he measured different like heavy metals and plastics in blood, urine, and sweat, and found that there were quite a few who were preferentially excreted in sweat. So at higher levels, which means it's actively transported. So the levels were higher in sweat than were in plasma. So yeah, sweating is an active form of detoxification. And that's why it's really good, if you are sweating, to mop the sweat off with a towel. Don't let it just sit on your skin, otherwise you'll then reabsorb.
That's what I was coming to. He would, one of his things was, if you're using a sauna and you know that other people using it may also have chemical problems, in this case, the sauna should be almost washed out between people, and you should sit on separate towels and have a shower straight away afterwards.
Well, that's right. So showering afterwards and toweling the sweat off is really effective. And we know, like, chemotherapy drugs come out in sweat. There's a whole lot of toxic agents that you can actually sweat out. And it's amazing how, certainly as most adults don't sweat. We've got such sedentary lives. We've got cars. We've got manual devices, excavators and stuff that do our digging for us. We don't actually sweat unless we make a time and a plan for doing that. Because in our everyday lives, we're not that active as our ancestors were. But sweating is beneficial on so many levels. But certainly, and we've all got this huge toxic burden that we're exposed to from before we're born. And so having, opening up your channels of elimination, which I call your bladder, your bowel, your breath, your body, and your brain, having those channels of elimination open is really powerful for eliminating your toxic load. Well, you can never eliminate, but reducing your toxic load. And sweating, you'll feel good. It improves all the cardiovascular health, your metabolic health, your mental health, and even socially, you'll feel better. So yeah, I can't recommend it highly enough.
Right. There's a couple of questions come up before, so I'll put them to you now, and they're pretty straightforward, I think. What's your opinion on face masks? Firstly, to stop the virus getting up your nose, and secondly, to stop spreading viruses to others.
My personal view on face masks is I don't think they're useful at all. They're not going to stop the virus getting up your nose, and they're not going to really stop it spreading for others. And you don't really necessarily want that. I mean, the whole idea is that, the shutdown and all the social distancing measures were to save the health system, not to save you. Because once the virus is in the community, you're never going to stop it spreading. So what you want to do is you want to be exposed to it, but you want to be exposed to it when you're as healthy as possible. So then you can do what I said at the start. It'll get introduced to your nose, and then you'll build up antibodies and you'll be immune. And your fingers are part of that process. So your finger, like a child, when they're born, they'll touch everything and put it in their mouth because they're sampling their environment. And for your immune system to be healthy, your immune system needs to be stressed constantly. So it's good to be actually exposed to a whole range of different people and different viruses. And just by sitting next to someone, there's this sort of virome that happens in the air around us. That's actually a good thing that you want to be stimulated by. So, maybe the only one possible advantage of a mask is it can temporarily increase the humidity around your face. So if the air is really cold, it might just increase that humidity. But generally, I think actually masks are dangerous for many reasons. One because, okay, it's harder to breathe and you get hypoxia. You're rebreathing viral particles that you're putting, that you might be breathing out. They sort of take away your humanity, and they sort of remind you that you need to be scared of the world, which really you don't. And they're actually not effective for, okay, when you're doing surgery, you and I, we're both doctors. When we go to surgery, we don't want to spit and drool into a patient. But otherwise, masks, all they are is a reminder that there's something big and dangerous out there and you need to be scared of it. And actually, I think that's actually more harmful than helpful. That's
right. Another question here is sneezing helpful for removing the virus? I've not thought of that. But.
Well, absolutely. So sneezing, I don't know about viruses so much. It's more, pollen and antigen that make you sneeze. But yeah, you're exposed all the time to viruses and pollen, antigen, all these things that come through your nasal passages. And as I say, normally that mucus would be swept away at 1 millimeter a minute, and you'd swallow 30 mils a day and goes into your stomach and just gets dissolved by the stomach acid. But occasionally, when that doesn't happen, sneeze in the explosive expulsion, or a cough can be an expulsion where you expectorate that, and that does help remove it. But what you want to remove the virus, but before you remove it, you want to show it to one of your antigen presenting cells, so then you can show it to your T cells and make long-term B cells and make up antibodies. And people are actively doing that. And there's now antibody studies all over the world from COVID-19 to show maybe 20% of the population have antibodies and they never knew they were sick. So it means they've been exposed to it, it's gone up their nose, it's been presented to one of their cells, because that's the only way you're going to make antibodies, when it's gone up your nose and presented to your immune system. And your immune system is designed to do that. It's designed to detect viruses, to detect new viruses, and then work out their number, make up antibodies, and then store that away, and then expel them or swallow them. So that's just a normal process. And I don't think you want to. Well, you don't want to interfere with that. You want to encourage that and support that process. Yeah,
great. Look, you mentioned the permaculturist Bill Mollison, and this is a question. He recommends environmental weeds, is the question, I guess. And I wonder, is it a metaphor? Is it a metaphor about politicians, or is it something else, do you think?
Well, weeds are things we haven't worked out the use for yet. And often weeds are, they're doing recovery of damaged environments. So actually weeds can be really important and really useful. Yeah. So it really depends on whose perspective is a weed. If you're a monoculturalist and all you want is one crop, then anything that's not your one crop is a weed. But if you're Mother Nature and you want to create biodiversity and productivity, then everything has a role. All the different organisms have a role, whether it's fixing nitrogen, or it's holding the soil together, or it's producing green mulch for other plants, or so yeah, weeds can be actually really useful. And there's so many weeds that we now know are medicinal, as well as having their own place in the ecology.
Another question here is, how does NELP therapy, hot and cold water on feet, help? Any ideas on that?
Which therapy?
The KNELP, as in German. Yeah. Yeah.
So well, your feet are actually a really good. Like I was talking about your nose as being a thermal exchange area. So your feet and your legs are also really good for thermal exchange. So if you're doing this at home, you can, if you don't have access to a sauna, and we didn't mention this, you can do the same thing in the hot bath. But you get a bath hot enough where you find your head pounding a bit and you have to sit out. But then you might not have a cold plunge, but just having a cold foot bath can then because that you're vasodilated, you'll circulate the blood through your feet, and then you'll radiate heat from your legs and your feet. And in fact, that's a really important way when you cool down your body before you go to sleep. So if people can't, because you fall asleep while your body temperature is being lowered. If you can't actively lower your body temperature, then it's harder to fall asleep. So, and if your feet are really cold, it's hard to radiate heat out. So if you actually can raise the temperature of your feet, then when you go to sleep, you can actually, you actually get a better quality sleep and you'll fall asleep easier. So using your feet as a way to, rather than chilling your whole body, if you just put your legs and your feet into a cold pool, that will still vasoconstrict, it will still send the blood into your core and it'll dissipate heat. So yeah, Knipe therapy, sort of gym, they have the walking when you walk up and down, in the different temperatures. And again, it's like going from hot to cold. It's like this bicep curl for your vascular system. And that's a good thing.
Lovely. In fact, you may have answered this one already. The question is sweating in a hot bath and sauna different in terms of raising the core body temperature?
Depends how hot. But certainly you can in a hot bath, you can easily, raise your body temperature 1 to 1.5 degrees. And that's where you get the advantage. But it means you have to get to the point of that forced mindfulness where it's so hot, then you have to think, oh, wow, I need to sit out for a minute. And that doesn't happen at 36.5 or 37 degrees. It'll happen at 40 degrees. So, you really have to sort of turn the heat up on yourself and then, feel to the point where, okay, I'm really hot now. How long can I tolerate this? And then it's this sort of, you're doing this personal inquiry of how comfortable are you being uncomfortable? How well can you tolerate that? And then you can sort of trick your body a little bit. I remember we did that when we were at Maruya Hot Springs, where you're in the sauna and you're getting really hot. So then you just get some ice or some ice water and you tip that just on your head, or you put a face washer that's been in ice water over your face, so you can cool down part of your body, so the rest of your body can stay in that hot environment, and you can prolong that while you're maintaining really good hydration as well. So yeah, just like, it doesn't matter how you sweat, in my opinion, whether it's a far infrared sauna or a Finnish sauna or a hot bath or exercise, getting your body temperature up gives you those advantages.
To kind of finish off with, Marc, if you were to end on a sort of, what is the positive note you can give us of a few bullet points, both for our own personal health in terms of the things you've been talking about, and what we can do more as a society, but as personalized as possible, if you like, as positive bullet points?
Sure. So, I mean, to realize that we are powerful and that the best thing we can do is to build up our own resilience, our own immunological, psychological, physiological resilience. So they're things that require us to put ourselves under conscious stress. And I've mentioned some of those. So it's, things like, filtering and flushing your bladder. So, having really quality water, having herbal tea. So you're keeping your body really flushed and hydrated. To feast and fast your bowels. So having really, good food, but also fasting occasionally. And I'm a big fan of intermittent fasting, which people do anyway. You fast overnight anyway. So if you just prolong that fast and eat when you're hungry rather than when it's breakfast time. So if you get in touch with your hunger, you'll be surprised that you can actually, spend 12, 15, 16, 18 hours a day not eating. And then that gives your digestive system a chance to fully relax and prepare. So when the food does come, you're in a position to get all the nutrients out of it. And you'll find that actually you need to eat less, but you actually have more energy, because it takes a lot of energy to process food. So if you're eating less, but you're getting more energy out of it, you actually have more energy and you save on food. So that's, doing the hot and cold for your body is really powerful. And that can be done in so many different environments. Hot bath, sauna, exercise, hot shower, hot and cold shower, the cold water hokey pokey. Maybe we'll put a link in the notes to the cold water hokey pokey, which just means you start with a hot shower and then you make the decision to have a cold shower. You turn the hot water off, the cold water on, and then just wet your left foot, and then your leg, and then your right foot and your leg. So you gradually do your periphery, and you vasoconstrict your periphery. So you push that hot blood into your core, then you do your arms, and then, so you gradually introduce yourself to the cold. And one of the powerful things you can do there is, before you put your neck and your sensitive, where your warm blood vessels are, instead of putting the cold water on there and doing that breathe in, and that reproduces the body chemistry and the breathing pattern of trauma, what you can do is take a big breath in, and as you're doing the cold, you breathe out. And just doing that will change your experience of the cold. And that, so just on that, a really practical thing, I've been writing poetry lately. I've been summarizing all my medical knowledge and it's coming out as poetry. And one of the things I've been summarizing is how you can turn off your fight and flight response and turn on your rest and digest response. So how can you, relax on demand or force your parasympathetic nervous system to become more active? And your fight and flight system is what happens when you're scared, when you're in pain, or when you're in an emergency. And we're in this global emergency now, so people are in fight and flight mode. But fight and flight mode actively turns off your immune system, because you don't want to waste energy healing when you're battling a tiger or running away from a tiger or fighting for your life. So you're actively, cortisol and adrenaline turn off your immune system. And it's when you're safe in your cave that then you turn on your parasympathetic nervous system. And that's when you sleep, and that's when you eat, and that's when you do fine finger movements, do creative pursuits. So they're the things that will turn on your rest and digest system and turn off your fight and flight. So I've come up with what I call the 10 hacks to relax. So these are things you can do to turn off your fight and flight and turn on your rest and digest. And they're very simple. It's touch all your fingers, wiggle your toes, soften your stomach, breathe through your nose, sigh, smile, swallow, sing, la 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 la, flutter your eyelids, and focus within. And all of those activities, they're activities that you do when you're safe in your cave. So the fine finger movements, wiggling your toes and fingers, that activates a bigger part of your brain, your homunculus. Fluttering your eyelids and swallowing. These are all things you do which are parasympathetic innervated. So that's anytime you're scared, upset, relaxed, or upset or in pain, anxious, just doing those activities. I've had people give me amazing feedback when they're at the dentist or having starting to feel anxious. You just do those 10 activities, and it really does help turn on your rest and digest mode. And I think that's really important, because there is so much fear going on now. And even the social distancing and the things, because it just activates fear. You're just thinking, okay, there's something out to kill me all the time. And chances are
even the word social distance, when it's really physical distance, we're trying to be actually more sociable as we go along. But
that's right. So a lot of these measures are actually anti-life and anti-immunity, because if you think the things that build our immunity is social connection, hugs and kisses and touch, and physical touch is really important for our immune system. So and it's really important for us to be able to go out into sunshine and to exercise and to eat good food and to socialize. So a lot of these measures are actually preventing us from building our own immunity. And so we need to take back control over our own immune system, realize we are powerful, our immune systems are strong, and there's things we can even do to strengthen them further.
One, before we finish, because I think we're getting close to the end here, Mark, there was a straightforward question. What is the relevance of alkalized water or hydrogenized water? Are they better?
Okay, wow, that's a big question. I mean, it's a great question. Alkalinized water is just water with a different pH, and you can add sodium bicarbonate to water, or you can electrocute your water, electrolyze it, and make water alkaline. I don't see the logic in that, because your stomach has a pH of 1, and your body is really well buffered. So drinking alkaline water to change your pH, I think, is not really sensible. What they have found, though, is when you electrocute water, with one of these electronic devices, you increase the hydrogen, and hydrogen actually is beneficial. It's an amazing antioxidant. So it's the hydrogen in the alkaline water that's important, not the alkalinity of the water. Actually, there's even a difference between alkaline and alkalinity, because alkalinity is the ability of the water to buffer pH, whereas alkaline just means the actual pH of that water. So, and water, really good drinking water, it can even be slightly acidic, but it does depend on the mineral content. And often it's the mineral content that actually makes water alkaline or acidic and gives it its alkalinity. So we love to talk about water quality. That's one of my favorite topics, but the whole issue around, naturally alkaline water, is a good thing. And, around neutral water, but you don't want to have, your body is really well buffered in terms of, the pH and the temperature and glucose concentration and hydration. All of these things are really well controlled homeostatically. It can be good to stress your body one way or the other and then come back. so it trains your body to find that balance. But drinking overly alkaline water, I don't think is something you should do on a regular basis.
I said it was the last question, but there's one come up that says, what can we do to improve our water quality? What would you do?
Okay, so I've got to declare a conflict of interest because I've actually just created a water company, and we're working on a filtration system that's more than just filter. I mean, you want to get rid of the toxic stuff. So filtering is really important, and filtering is really complex issue, but you want to filter it, structure your water, balance the water in terms of pH and minerals, and you want to have a conscious connection to your water. Water is actually a living, conscious substance that holds memory, that holds consciousness. So you don't want to use water as a commodity or as just an industrial product that comes out of your tap. Another thing I think that's really important is that water needs to be free. It should not be a commodity that we buy. And there's a great website called Find a Spring, where you can just look up your local spring, and they're all over the world, and you get free water from the spring. And I think that's how traditionally, I mean, water as a commodity is only about 50, 100, less than 100 years old, where they try to make water a commodity and now they're putting into 500 billion plastic bottles every year. 1 million plastic bottles a minute are being produced and thrown out. And I think that's, we are water. If we're 2/3 water by volume or by mass, but if you count the molecules in your body, you're 99% water in terms of the molecules in your body. So water is the infrastructure for your body. It's the operating system that everything else works from. So if you can upgrade your water, and as Bill Mollison said, when you get the basic things right, everything else goes right by itself. So I'm creating water filtration systems that aren't just filter systems. They're like sacred water vessels that produce water that's filtered, structured, balanced, blessed, and you can give that away for free. And I'm hoping that businesses will start using that and giving away the water for free, and then transcending the need for plastic water bottles. But yeah, so getting a decent filter. It's really important to have water filtered that you bathe in as well as drink, and especially with chlorine, because chlorine is, the reason why they use chlorine is it's so toxic, it'll kill bacteria at 0.2 to 0.6 parts per million when it comes out of your tap. And that's, the National Health and Medical Research Council in Australia, that's their guidelines, 0.2 to 0.6 parts per million. We put poison in our water to make it safe. But they say that if you're making babies, you're giving water to babies, you have to boil it first because of the chlorine and baby's sensitive microbiome. But bacteria are our friends. The bacteria on our skin, bacteria in our, our nasal passages, but bacteria in our guts are really important for our health. And we don't want to be, declaring war on our friends with war chemicals. So getting the chlorine out of the water. And when you bathe in water, you generally bathe in warm water. So once water's over 25 degrees centigrade, that chlorine becomes volatile and it outgasses. And not just the chlorine, you get disinfection byproducts. So they've done studies in the late 1990s. They did studies where they measured chlorine in your blood after drinking 2 litres of chlorinated water, and it didn't show up in the blood because your liver filtered it out. It's not that great for your liver, but it makes your liver work hard, but it doesn't appear in your blood. But you have a 5 or 10 minute shower or a bath, the chlorine becomes volatile, you breathe it in through your lungs and you absorb it through your skin directly, and it appears in your lungs, in your blood straight afterwards. So that is an issue. So it's really good to try and bathe in water. And if you don't have a whole house filter, which is the ideal, even if you just make the bath really hot and then wait half an hour with the fan on, after half an hour, 20 minutes, that chlorine will outgas. It's not great for your fixtures and fittings, but if you've got your fan on, that's all right. And then have a bath once the chlorine's had a chance to outgas. So you can bathe in chlorine-free water. So I think that's, and if you think about chlorine as well, it's an oxidizing agent. And your skin, they used to think your skin surface area, I mean, when we went to medical school, it's like 1.8 meter squared, surface area of your skin. And your gut, we know your gut has a big surface area because all the villi, or the little fingers in your gut that increase the surface area. But now they've just, realized that your skin has these, what they call reverse villi. So every time you have a hair follicle or a sweat gland, it dips in and dips out, and that creates massive increased surface area of your skin. So if you count the surface area of your sweat glands and your hair follicles, your skin's got a surface area of about 30 square meters. So that's a really big area for your interaction with normal good bacteria, but also that's where all the oils are secreted that protect you from the sun, that protect you from pathogens. So you don't want to be oxidizing your, your natural skin oils and all those beautiful bacteria that are part of your natural ecosystem with, disinfectants. So that's, yeah.
That's fantastic, because I know you can talk on this subject for so long, Mark, and it's been a fabulous evening for me. You've shown, as I said at the beginning, that you've got this tremendous, inspirational, innovative mind. I should say at this point as a writer that these opinions aren't necessarily those of AIMA, but these are personal opinions we've been expressing. So I want to thank you hugely for your input, Mark. I've greatly enjoyed it. And also to say to those who've asked questions and put in the chat box, thank you for that too. So thank you indeed, Mark. A wonderful evening. Look forward to meeting you before too long. Let's hope
look forward to it.
we open that border up.